Every day, something dramatic happens in the Caribbean that affects our lives. We'll give you the details. We'll give you the facts on Caribbean Perspective with Eddie Frederick. Host Eddie Frederick.
So glad you can join us. A fall in literacy rate, a concern for some Barbadians. This story takes the lead in our 939th edition of Caribbean Perspective for Thursday, 10th September 2020. Details after this important message.
The hurricane season is now upon us, so we as Caribbean people need to remember to think safety and be prepared. Avoid venturing outside during a storm or hurricane, especially if there are strong winds. Rooftops and other debris are often blown about and can cause great damage.
Welcome back. Principal of Erdiston Teachers Training College, Dr. Patricia Saul, is concerned about the slipping literacy rate in Barbados. She said, according to the most recent statistics published by UNESCO, 773 million adults and young people lacked basic literacy skills, and more than 617 million children and adolescents were not achieving minimum proficiency levels in reading and mathematics. No doubt the COVID-19 pandemic has exacerbated these problems. In Barbados, there is a growing concern that the proportion of the population lacking functional reading and writing skills is far too high in spite of the fact that we have universal access to education. This is a serious hindrance to the development of our people and our country, Saul said. She was speaking during the ceremony to mark the International Literacy Day celebrations in the Dorothy King Teaching Complex at the Pine Road St. Michael College. In other news, even as Finance Minister, Trinidad and Tobago is bashing the Express newspaper for what he calls a bacchanalian headline, reading Imbert, brace for COVID-19 budget, one former energy minister and one economist are echoing exact sentiments. They are predicting widespread austerity measures in the 2021 budget, inclusive but not limited to potential wage cuts. Economist Roger Hussein and former Energy Minister Kevin Ramnarine joined TV6 virtually on set on the morning edition.
It's a worsening situation. Doors of more businesses are being shut, but it's only a snapshot of those affected. Economist Dr. Roger Hussein expects unemployment to have doubled in the past 6 months. With no sector exempt, TNT has recorded declines in manufacturing, energy and construction, leaving tourism, like most other Caribbean islands, on life support. It is with dread some may look to the country's 2021 fiscal package. The shock in the global economy means there are no goodies in sight, even if it were as simple as an LED light bulb. On the business front, Gregory Aboud, president of the Downtown Owners and Merchants Association, says his membership has one wish: no added burdens. Speaking with TV6, Mr. Aboud says while a huge sector of the economy pays no taxes, the production sector have been bearing the load of government's revenue. He says, quote, persons employed, the salaried cohort of state and private sector, have been contributing taxes while companies and businesses pay income tax and value-added tax, end quote. Mr. Aboud recognizes the discussion raises anxiety levels of the population and government. He says, quote, I hope the minister would not be tempted by the imposition of taxes without significant improvement in the ease of doing business and the facilitation of new investment in TNT, end quote. His members, he says, are looking for stimulation and incentives like tax breaks. He says, quote, take the construction sector, for example. It's a driver of economic growth. If government gives developers a 10-year tax break from income earned from house sales, it will boost investment, employment, economic activity, and will place affordable housing in the hands of people who need it, thereby improving the quality of life in TNT. Sounds like a drop in the bucket, but cash in the hands of laborers can keep the doors of small shops and businesses open. Another suggestion is to offer a 75 to 100% tax exemption for premiums paid to insurance companies by businesses for health coverage for employees. Mr. Booth says, quote, employees can get proper coverage. It may stimulate private healthcare facilities to expand, thereby employing more people, and it will ease the burden off of the public healthcare system, end quote. The International Labour Organization calls for governments to take immediate action to keep businesses open and young persons employed. Since the start of the pandemic, it says 1 in every 6 people in the 18 to 29 age group has stopped working. Sang-Yin Lee, director of the ILO's Employment Policy Department, says, quote, unless urgent action is taken, young people are likely to suffer severe and long-standing impacts from the pandemic. We believe there's a genuine risk of the lockdown generation who actually will be scarred throughout their working lives. Urvashi Tiwari Rupnarayan, TV6 News.
You're listening to Caribbean Perspective with Eddie Frederick.
The countdown to budget day is on, and business owners are pleading with government to not add further burdens on them. Vanessa Cutting of TV6 News has that story.
With budget day set for October 5th, it's just about 1 month before we're told of government's economic plan for the country. But against the backdrop of a minus 10% contraction rate as announced by the Prime Minister, the country is being advised to batten down.
I think it's the first time that we've heard the announcement of a budget date so 1 month in advance. And I think the signal is being sent clearly to the country that this is going to be a challenging budget, a difficult budget, a COVID budget. And, brace for impact, so to speak.
Economist Dr. Roger Hussein believes the austerity measures which may be implemented will have direct impact on the ordinary citizen.
The state won't be able to continue its employment sustainability of people, nor can it increase wages, and it is possible we may have to cut wages. The government would, in that setting, now need to cut government expenditure perhaps from about 53 billion down to about 45 billion.
And with BP soon to reduce its workforce and NGC declaring one of its lowest profits after tax due to depressed oil and natural gas production and prices, former Energy Minister Kevin Ramnarayan believes the cuts will be deep.
And I make this point to drive home the reality that on a consistent basis, BP and NGC are the two largest taxpayers in Trinidad and Tobago.
Dr. Hussein is hopeful the expected hit to the labor market and revenues will be offset by innovation and diversification.
Our unemployment rate using available data in the third quarter of 2018 is about 4%. That would probably rise to about 8 or 9%. And what we would need to do as a people, we would need to make use, for example, of the opportunities that are going to come our way in agriculture. The state has suggested they would put an additional 500 million into agriculture.
But Dr. Hossein says he believes that the PNM administration can and will do whatever it takes to bring the country back to economic safety.
This government was able to cut total government expenditure from 63 billion to 53 billion or thereabouts. That's 10 billion savings a year. And if they did that for the 5 years, which they did, they basically did not spend 50 billion, which they could have spent if, for example, it was the previous government. That's one. Two, another major hardcore intervention that this particular Prime Minister made is the close down Petrochin.
Vanessa Cutting, TV6 News.
An insight to a multi-billion-dollar emergency budget was presented on Monday by Guyana's President Irfan Ali. The president says the emergency budget is in keeping with the party's campaign promises. Here are details from HGP's Travis Chase.
45 budgetary measures were on Monday afternoon announced by President Irfan Ali, which the president says will form part of an emergency national budget. The budget will be presented during the second sitting of the National Assembly on Wednesday. Topping the list is a $25,000 for every household hit by COVID-19. The value-added tax to be removed from water and electricity, while pensioners will no longer be charged for water. old age pensions being increased to $25,000 per month, annual school uniform voucher increased to $4,000, while the cash voucher for school children will be reintroduced at $15,000 per year, among others.
To remove corporate tax on private education, we're hoping to that private institutions now can address issues of cost of education to children because they will benefit now from the removal of corporate tax on private education. Then, in order to make healthcare more affordable and to support the expansion of the healthcare sector, to become a foreign export corner potential, we are removing corporate tax on private healthcare. So we have the removal of corporate tax on private education and the removal of corporate tax on private healthcare. Again, to stimulate the economy, to ensure more people have access to loans, to ensure that more young people, young professionals can benefit from incentives of owning their own homes. We have decided in terms of mortgage interest relief to increase the sum that will have the income tax relief or the tax relief to $30 million.
The president has also set aside $150 million for frontline healthcare workers. The ban on the importation of used tires and the importation of vehicles that are more than 8 years old will also be lifted.
Over the last 5 years, we have had tremendous increases in license fees, some by almost 500%. So the next measure will address this directly. Any license that was increased and renewed after the 1st of October 2020 would be reduced by 50%. So all those license fees that were increased by 300%, 400%, 200%, you will see that a reduction by half, reducing those increases by 50%. In order to stimulate the logging industry, the forestry sector, and to help sawmillers, we're going to change the log export policy to allow sawmillers to now export logs. This will increase production and taxes.
The president plans in the emergency budget to reverse all of the land lease fees to assist the agriculture sector. VAT is also being removed from hinterland travel.
Rehabilitate and to bring back those estates into operation, recreating those jobs and supporting the economies in those areas where estates were closed. We are setting aside $5 billion for budgetary support for Gaisuku directly.
Nightly News understands that the minister with responsibility for finance, Barbadians, will present the budget on Wednesday during the second sitting of the National Assembly.
We do not take our promises lightly, and therefore I'm so pleased that we've been able to, within a month of the new government, move to address a lot of these issues. The underlying philosophy of the budget will not depart radically from that of the manifesto. And what was that philosophy? That we wanted to return Guyana to a coherent economic policy.
Travis Chase, HGP Nightly News.
I am Eddie Frederick. This has been Caribbean Perspective, a whole new approach to highlighting developments in the Caribbean. In the meantime, please continue to log on to CaribbeanPerspective.com for more daily news and more.